Mrs. Hodgson, voices in the dark. Finally, after what seemed like a forever of running, someone yelled, "I think we lost them." "Amos?" "I'm right here," said Amos's voice a few feet behind me. "We can stop," Miles yelled from further up. "Jack!" I yelled. "Whoa," said Jack. "I'm here." "I can't see a thing." "Are you sure we lost them?" Henry asked, letting go of my arm. That's when I realised that he'd been the one who was pulling me as we ran. "Yeah." "Shh. Let's listen." We all got super quiet, listening for footsteps in the dark. All we could hear were the crickets and frogs and our own crazy panting. We were out of breath, stomachs hurting, bodies bent over our knees. "We lost them," said Henry. "Whoa, that was intense. What happened to the flashlight?" "I dropped it." "How did you guys know?" said Jack. "We saw them before. They looked like jerks." "You just rammed into him," I said to Amos. "I know, right?" laughed Amos. "He didn't even see it coming," said Miles. "He was like, 'Are you a freak too?' And you were like, 'Bam!' said Jack. 'Bam!' said Amos, throwing a fake punch in the air. But after I tackled him, I was like, 'Run! Amos, you schmuck, he's 10 times bigger than you.' And I got up and started running as fast as I could. We all started laughing. I grabbed Augie and I was like, 'Run!' said Henry. "I didn't even know it was you pulling me," I answered. "That was wild," said Amos, shaking his head. "Totally wild." "Your lip is bleeding, dude." "I got in a couple of good punches," answered Amos, wiping his lip. "I think they were 7th graders. They were huge." "Losers," Henry shouted really loudly, but we all shushed him. We listened for a second to make sure no one had heard him. "Where the heck are we?" asked Amos. "I can't even see the screen." "I think we're in the cornfields," answered Henry. "Duh, we're in the cornfields," said Miles, pushing a cornstalk at Henry. "Okay, I know exactly where we are," said Amos. "We have to go back in this direction. That'll take us to the other side of the field." "Yo, dudes," said Jack, hand high in the air. "That was really cool of you guys to come back for us. Really cool. Thanks." "No problem," answered Amos, high-fiving Jack. And then Miles and Henry high-fived him too. "Yeah, dudes, thanks," I said, holding my palm up like Jack just had, though I wasn't sure if they'd high-five me too. Amos looked at me and nodded. "It was cool how you stood your ground, little dude," he said, high-fiving me. "Yeah, Augie," said Miles, high-fiving me too. "You were like, 'We're littler than you guys.'" I didn't know what else to say. I laughed. "Very cool," said Henry, and he high-fived me too. "Sorry I ripped your sweatshirt." I looked down, and my sweatshirt was completely torn down the middle. One sleeve was ripped off, and the other was so stretched out it was hanging down to my knees. "Hey, your elbow's bleeding," said Jack. "Yeah," I shrugged. It was starting to hurt a lot. "You okay?" said Jack, seeing my face. I nodded. Suddenly I felt like crying, and I was trying really hard not to do that. "Wait, your hearing aids are gone," said Jack. "What?" I yelled, touching my ears. The hearing aid band was definitely gone. That's why I felt like I was underwater. "Oh no," I said, and that's when I couldn't hold it in anymore. Everything that had just happened kind of hit me, and I couldn't help it. I started to cry. Like big crying, what Mum would call the waterworks. I was so embarrassed I hid my face in my arm, but I couldn't stop the tears from coming. The guys were really nice to me though. They patted me on the back. "You're okay, dude. It's okay," they said. "You're one brave little dude, you know that," said Amos, putting his arm around my shoulders. And when I kept on crying, he put both his arms around me like my dad would have done, and let me cry. The Emperor's Guard. We backtracked through the grass for a good 10 minutes to see if we could find my hearing aids, but it was way too dark to see anything. We literally had to hold on to each other's shirts and walk in single file so we wouldn't trip over one another. It was like black ink had been poured all around. "This is hopeless," said Henry. "They could be anywhere." "Maybe we can come back with a flashlight," answered Amos. "No, it's okay," I said. "Let's just go back. Thanks, though." We walked back towards the cornfields and then cut through them until the back of the giant screen came into view. Since it was facing away from us, we didn't get any light from the screen at all until we'd walked round to the edge of the woods again. That's where we finally started seeing a little light. There was no sign of the 7th graders anywhere. "Where do you think they went?" said Jack. "Back to the food truck," said Amos. "They're probably thinking we're going to report them." "Are we?" asked Henry. They looked at me. I shook my head. "Okay," said Amos. "But, little dude, Don't walk around here alone again, okay? If you need to go somewhere, tell us and we'll go with you. Okay, I nodded. As we got closer to the screen, I could hear "High on a hill was a lonely goat herd" and could smell the cotton candy from one of the concession stands near the food trucks. There were lots of kids milling around in this area, so I pulled what was left of my hoodie over my head and kept my face down, hands in pockets, as we made our way through the crowd. It had been a long time since I'd been out without my hearing aids, and it felt like I was miles under the earth. It felt like that song Miranda used to sing to me, "Ground control to Major Tom. Your circuit's dead. There's nothing wrong." I did notice as I walked that Amos had stayed right next to me, and Jack was close on the other side of me, and Miles was in front of us, and Henry was in back of us. They were surrounding me as we walked through the crowds of kids, like I had my own Emperor's Guard. Sleep. Then they came out of the narrow valley, and at once she saw the reason. There stood Peter and Edmund and all the rest of Aslan's army fighting desperately against the crowd of horrible creatures whom she had seen last night. Only now, in the daylight, they looked even stranger and more evil and more deformed. I stopped there. I'd been reading for over an hour and sleep still didn't come. It was almost 2 a.m. Everyone else was asleep. I had my flashlight on under the sleeping bag, and maybe the light was why I couldn't sleep, but I was too afraid to turn it off. I was afraid of how dark it was outside the sleeping bag. When we got back to our section, in front of the movie screen, no one had even noticed we'd been gone. Mr. Tushman and Miss Rubin and Summer and all the rest of the kids were just watching the movie. They had no clue how something bad had almost happened to me and Jack. It's so weird how that can be, how you can have a night that's the worst in your life, but to everyone else it's just an ordinary night. Like on my calendar at home, I would mark this as being one of the most horrific days of my life. This and the day Daisy died. But for the rest of the world, this was just an ordinary day. Or maybe it was even a good day. Maybe somebody won the lottery today. Amos, Miles and Henry brought me and Jack over to where we've been sitting before, with Summer and Maya and Reed, and then they went and sat where they had been sitting before, with Zimna and Savannah and their group. In a way, everything was exactly as we had left it before we went looking for the toilets. The sky was the same. The movie was the same. Everyone's faces were the same. Mine was the same. But something was different. Something had changed. I could see Amos and Miles and Henry telling their group about what had just happened. I knew they were talking about it because they kept looking over at me while they were talking. Even though the movie was still playing, people were whispering about it in the dark. News like that spreads fast. It was what everyone was talking about on the bus ride back to the cabins. All the girls, even girls I didn't know very well, were asking me if I was okay. The boys were all talking about getting revenge on the group of 7th grade jerks, trying to figure out what school they were from. I wasn't planning on telling the teachers about any of what had happened, but they found out anyway. Maybe it was the torn sweatshirt and the bloody elbow. Or maybe it's just that teachers hear everything. When we got back to the camp, Mr. Tushman took me to the first aid office, and while I was getting my elbow cleaned and bandaged up by the camp nurse, Mr. Tushman and the camp director were in the next room, talking with Amos and Jack and Henry and Miles, trying to get a description of the troublemakers. When he asked me about them a little later, I said I couldn't remember their faces at all, which wasn't true. It's their faces I kept seeing every time I closed my eyes to sleep. The look of total horror on the girl's face when she first saw me. The way the kid with the flashlight, Eddie, looked at me as he talked to me like he hated me. Like a lamb to the slaughter. I remember Dad saying that ages ago, but tonight I think I finally got what it meant. Aftermath. Mum was waiting for me in the front of the school along with all the other parents when the bus arrived. Mr. Tushman told me on the bus ride home that they had called my parents to tell them there had been a situation the night before, but that everyone was fine. He said the camp director and several of the counsellors went looking for the hearing aid in the morning while we all went swimming in the lake, but they couldn't find it anywhere. Broadwood would reimburse us the cost of the hearing aids, he said. They felt bad about what had happened. I wondered if Eddie had taken my hearing aids with him as a kind of souvenir, something to remember the Orc. Mum gave me a tight hug when I got off the bus, but she didn't slam me with questions like I thought she might. Her hug felt good, and I didn't shake it off like some of the other kids were doing with their parents' hugs. The bus driver started unloading our duffel bags, and I went to find mine while Mum talked to Mr. Tushman and Miss Rubin, who had walked over to her. As I rolled my bag toward her, a lot of kids who don't usually say anything to me were nodding hello or patting my back as I walked by them. "Ready?" Mum said when she saw me. She took my duffel bag, and I didn't even try to hold on to it. I was fine with her carrying it. If she had wanted to carry me on her shoulders, I would have been fine with that too, to be truthful. As we started to walk away, Mr. Tushman gave me a quick, tight hug, but didn't say anything.